Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. I recently made a video playing Matchmaker for the UFC welterweight division, and you guys seem to really like that video and asked me to do a video for the bantamweight division. And if you guys have followed my channel at all, you know my opinion about the bantamweight division. I think this is the best division in all the UFC. There's so much talent, and basically no one in the top 15 currently has a fight. Well, actually, there's one fight made with the current top 15 of the bantamweight division. We'll get to that a little bit later. But other than that, I am going to give you realistic potential next fights for everyone within the bantamweight top 15. And you guys know the division is so good. Honestly, you could pick names at random and match them up with each other and you would get nothing but great fights. So we're going to start with the champion and work our way down all the way down to number 15. And I'm going to give you all the potential next fights. Starting with the champion, Aljamain Sterling. We all know what his next fight is. We are going to see Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan. Petr Yan is the interim bantamweight champion right now. He won that at UFC 267 against Cory Sandhagen. An absolute amazing fight. And I know it's a little bit of a weird situation because people consider Petr Yan to be the actual bantamweight champion just because he was going to probably finish Aljamain Sterling. Bare minimum, he was going to win a dominant decision against Aljamain Sterling earlier this year. And unfortunately, he makes a terrible mistake, throws an illegal knee, and Aljamain Sterling can no longer continue. Whether you believe that's true or not, he can no longer continue. Mark Smith, the referee, disqualifies Petr Yan. And now we're in a weird situation where everyone thinks the champion's just a paper champion and everyone foresees Petr Yan reclaiming his belt. So that's the only fight to make. Honestly, this fight's already been booked once. It was supposed to happen in October. Aljamain Sterling needed more time to recover from surgery. So obviously, this is the fight we have to see. There's no other fight that's acceptable. Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling 2 has to happen. We need some, finality to the bantamweight division. I'm tired of this weird scenario we have right now where Aljamain Sterling really lost the fight but somehow claimed the belt. And honestly, with this whole storyline going on, Aljamain Sterling has kind of, become this guy that everybody hates the way he's acted after claiming the belt. I think a lot of people are going to be really pumped for this matchup. And also, I'm super interested because Yan is just so well-rounded and so elite in every aspect of MMA. I'm curious what Aljamain Sterling looks at in that first fight and says, you know what, in this second fight, I can make these adjustments and I can beat Petr Yan. I'm genuinely curious to see what he can do in such, it's a relatively short period of time. It should be within 12 months they fight again. And that first fight, other than the first round, Yan was just dominating him everywhere in the striking, in the grappling, in the clinch. If anybody thought Aljamain Sterling was going to win that fight, that you thought that he was going to take Petr Yan down, hold him down, and Petr Yan out-grappled him, took him down multiple times. So my level of intrigue for that fight is higher than it was with the original matchup, even though I suspect that Petr Yan will win. So let's move on. That's enough time spent on that matchup. Next up in the division, ranked number 2 currently is TJ Dillashaw, and I think there's only one fight to make for TJ Dillashaw. And that's number 3 ranked José Aldo. José Aldo is on a nasty streak. Everybody doubted this guy moving down to the bantamweight division. They said, he already cuts too much weight to make 145. How is he going to make 135? People were saying he was on deathbed on the scale at weigh-ins for 135. He has looked spectacular. He most recently has a win over Rafael. He's on a 3-fight win streak. TJ Dillashaw is only on a 1-fight win streak against Cory Sandhagen. But TJ Dillashaw is the former champion, never lost the belt, got caught cheating, was injecting EPO into his body. So then he got suspended for 2 years, took 2 years off, came back, fought Cory Sandhagen, won the decision, even though a lot of people thought it was questionable. And now, a lot of people, TJ and a lot of his fans think he deserves the next title shot just because he never lost the belt. But I think he should have to win at least 2 fights. And if he can beat José Aldo, I'm okay with him getting another title shot in 2022. But he has to beat José Aldo, and that is a tough test. I mean, José Aldo looks so good against Rob Font. I know he had his moments where he faced adversity, but he was just hurting Rob Font each and every round. He was making adjustments, and for all the knocks on José Aldo's cardio, he won the 5th round against Rob Font, who we know has 5-round cardio. He out-grappled him. He landed the harder shots on the feet. And I'm curious, I'm always curious to see a hard leg kicker. And I know Aldo gets a little bit of heat for not throwing enough leg kicks. but I'm always curious to see a guy who's known for his leg kicks fight one of these guys that have crazy footwork, and TJ Dillashaw is one of those guys. So I would love to see this fight. If you guys watch my video on most anticipated fights of 2022, which I will link in the end cards as well as the description, TJ Dillashaw versus José Aldo is the fight that I want to see, and I think it makes most sense. And the winner of that fight should be the #1 contender to fight for the bantamweight title of the winner of Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan, unless something fishy happens in that fight again. So moving down the rankings, José Aldo is number 3. I just gave you his matchup. Number 4 is Cory Sandhagen, and I think the most perfect matchup for Cory Sandhagen is Rob Font. They're both coming off losses. Sandhagen's on a 2-fight losing streak, but it's not all that bad of a 2-fight losing streak. He's coming off a loss to TJ Dillashaw in the summer, but a lot of people, myself included, thought he won that fight, and then he's coming off one of the best fights of the year against Petr Yan in a fight that he took on relatively short notice. It was originally supposed to be Aljamain Sterling in there. Aljamain Sterling fell out. Sandhagen stepped in. It was about a month's notice, I believe. So, all things considered, it was a great performance. I know it was still a fairly dominant win by Petr Yan, but it was super high level. Sandhagen had his moments, and I believe with a full training camp, he has the potential to be able to beat a guy like Petr Yan. I'm not saying I would pick him, but he's super high level. And Rob Font looked like he was on a run to the title. Unfortunately, he recently ran into José Aldo, and José Aldo was just a stronger, more powerful guy. So they're both coming off losses. I think match both these guys up. I mean, who would not love to see Cory Sandhagen versus Rob Font? I would absolutely love that fight. It makes perfect sense right now, and stylistically, it's a super fan-friendly matchup. So moving down the rankings a little bit, next up is 6, Merab Dvalishvili, and he's coming off that crazy comeback performance against Marlon Moraes. And, he got hurt badly in that first round, and some refs might have even stopped that fight. Marlon Moraes gassed himself out, absolutely going hard after Merab after he hurt him. Merab weathered the storm. He's super durable, has an amazing gas tank. He comes back and stops Marlon Moraes, who I know Marlon Moraes gets shit on quite a bit recently just because he's on a losing streak. He's been KO'd quite a bit. But Marlon Moraes is still a very high-level 135er. And I still think this was a great win for Merab, and I actually picked against him in this fight. So this was a very quality win. I want to see Merab Dvalishvili against Marlon Vera. Marlon Vera is currently ranked number 8. Marlon Vera is currently on a 2-fight win streak. He's coming off that phenomenal win over Frankie Edgar at UFC 268. Was losing the fight, was getting dominated, grappling, and landed a front kick and knocked out Frankie Edgar. And I'm curious because obviously there's a hole in his game as far as his grappling goes. And how is he going to be able to kind of make adjustments to fight a guy who has an unlimited gas tank and has amazing grappling and is relentless as far as the takedowns? I want to see if Marlon Vera can go out there and beat Merab Dvalishvili. And this is kind of two guys who kind of, have become contenders, but there's still a little bit of what ifs about them. And if they can get that win, either guy, Merab or Marlon Vera, can get a win over the other, it's time for a #1 contender fight for either guy, I think, or at least 1 or 2 fights away from a potential title shot. And I just love fights that answer questions. And I want to see, how does Marlon Vera do against the grappler, especially after how he looked against Frankie Edgar in the early rounds. If he can't beat Merab, I don't think he's going to be able to beat a guy like Aljamain Sterling or a guy like Petr Yan. So this answers a lot of questions. And also, if Merab can't deal with a good striker like Marlon Vera, he's not going to beat a guy like Petr Yan or Cory Sandhagen or José Aldo. So this is the perfect fight for both guys. Moving down the rankings, next up is Dominick Cruz. And I want to see Dominick Cruz versus Sean O'Malley. Dominick Cruz, arguably the GOAT of the bantamweight division. He's coming off a big win over Pedro Munhoz, where he was hurt badly in the first round. Somehow survives and wins the second and third round rather easily. Pedro Munhoz was swinging at a lot of air. Dominick Cruz was able to use his footwork. He didn't look super old in that fight. And Dominick Cruz has shown that he's able to come back, after long layoffs and injuries and losses, and look fairly good. And I really would love to see this fight against Sean O'Malley. It's time to test Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley's only ever fought one ranked guy, and that was Marlon Vera. Marlon Vera kicked his legs out from underneath of him, then flash KO'd him with elbows, and then Sean O'Malley had to be stretchered out of the cage. A lot of people claimed it to be a fluke. But at the end of the day, Marlon Vera won the fight, and that was Sean O'Malley's toughest test at this point. So I'm ready. Sean O'Malley has looked great, but it's not that hard to look great against Raulian Paiva or, Thomas Almeida, who's on a 3-fight losing skid. It's time to see him against a guy we know is of a high skill level, and that's Dominick Cruz. And if Sean O'Malley can defeat Dominick Cruz, it's time for some very big fights for Sean O'Malley, and I will be aboard the Sean O'Malley train, at least partially. I don't know if he's going to be a guy to be able to compete with an Aljamain Sterling or a Petr Yan. And also, I really want to see Sean O'Malley's grappling tested as well. But a win over Dominick Cruz would be absolutely enormous. And also, Dominick Cruz, if he could get a win over Sean O'Malley, I know there's a lot of people talking, oh, I don't want to fight this guy or that guy because he's ranked behind me. If you can beat a guy that has so much hype around him, you absorb some of that hype and it really helps you moving forward. So if Dominick Cruz could defeat a guy like Sean O'Malley, send him to the back, it'd be a great win. So moving on to the next fighter, and this was actually the one fight that is already made for the UFC. I believe it's happening in March. It's number 9, Marlon Moraes, and he is going to fight Song Yadong. It's a little bit of a weird matchup, but I guess it makes sense stylistic-wise. I think this will be a super fun fight. Song Yadong's currently on a 2-fight win streak. Marlon Moraes is on like a 3-fight losing streak. Not in the greatest spot, and, it's kind of a bad matchup for Marlon Moraes considering he's been rather chinny lately. But if he can't beat a guy like Song Yadong, I think it's time for him to maybe move on to another organization. You look at Song, he's currently ranked number 14 in the rankings. Marlon Vera, for all his losses, being KO'd by Sandhagen, being KO'd by Raphael, he's still sitting at number 9. So honestly, he can get back on track with a win against Song Yadong, which I think is a manageable opponent, but he's got to worry about the power of Song Yadong catching him on that chin. But if he can beat him, then maybe he can start making a comeback and fighting some of these top 10 guys again. But right now, he's not in any position to really pick fights. He's got to take what fights are offered to him. He's on such a bad losing streak, and Marlon Moraes has really looked chinny lately. So that's the fight I want to see. So next up, you have number 10, Pedro Munhoz, and I want to see Pedro Munhoz versus Ricky Simone. This fight kind of doesn't really make sense as far as where they're at in their careers and their win-loss records as of lately, but I just think this is, you look at the top 15 and there's really nobody left. And also, I think Ricky Simone is ready for a really tough test. He just recently defeated Raphael Assuncao. Ricky Simone's currently on a 4-fight winning streak. He just KO'd Raphael Assuncao in the last event of the year. And I think, Raphael Assuncao has been off for a while. He was recently KO'd, not recently, but last year he was KO'd by Cody Garbrandt. He's kind of in a bad spot in his career. And Pedro Munhoz, even though he's lost 4 out of his last 5 and he's on a 2-fight losing streak, I mean, these fights aren't like massive blowouts. The Frankie Edgar split decision loss, he should have got the decision. The loss before that was to Aljamain Sterling, the current champion. Then he has a win over Jimmy Rivera. Then he lost to José Aldo, but look where José Aldo currently is. And then a loss to Dominick Cruz. He almost had the stoppage win in the first round, and he ends up losing the second and third. So it's not like this guy's getting blown out. And I've said for a long time, Pedro Munhoz is criminally underrated. And I think a fight against Ricky Simone answers questions for both guys. I want to see if Pedro Munhoz is really having a steep decline, or it's just, some of these things aren't going his way and, he just needs to make some adjustments. And can he beat an up-and-coming guy like Ricky Simone? I've said it before, I kind of want to see Ricky Simone against Sean O'Malley. That makes more sense in terms of ranking, but there's no way the UFC is going to make that matchup. Ricky Simone has great grappling, good striking, very good stamina. He's super relentless in terms of his takedowns, and he's just overall super well-rounded. So I really want to see this fight. Pedro Munhoz has nasty leg kicks, a granite chin, and great power in both his hands. His frame is more of like a flyweight frame, but he's had decent success at bantamweight. And if he can't beat Ricky Simone, then it's time, we have the young eat the old in Pedro Munhoz, and it's time for Ricky Simone to move up into that top 10 and really start looking at some big fights. So the last fight I have on the list, and this is the only fight of all, I think it's 8 fights that I've mentioned for you guys, is Frankie Edgar, and I want to see Frankie Edgar versus Raphael Assuncao. Frankie Edgar seems like he's on the downslope of his career. He's over 40 years old. Raphael Assuncao recently KO'd by Ricky Simone, and I think it's time, this fight is a fight where I feel like the loser gets cut, honestly. I mean, the bantamweight division is so nasty. We have so many up-and-coming killers within the division. If, the loser of this fight is probably going to get cut by the UFC. And that's really how I came to this matchup, and it was the only two guys left. Not super excited for it. I don't think Frankie Edgar or Raphael Assuncao is ever going to make a push for the title. Both guys are getting up there in age. Both guys have been in the UFC for a long time. Both guys are a little bit chinny. So I just, you got to match them up, and the loser can go over to Bellator or maybe PFL and make another career there. But I just don't see either of these guys being in the top 15 for much longer, considering all the killers we have hanging out, past 15. I think Frankie Edgar soon will be out of the top 15. I believe Raphael Assuncao will soon be out of the top 15. You got guys like Adriano Yanez, Davey Grant making their way up in the division, and there's just so many killers. So the loser of that fight, high stakes, gets cut from the UFC. The winner lives on to maybe get another couple fights within the UFC. But there are all my matchups for the bantamweight division. You guys have to let me know in the comments what fights you really like out of all these potential matchups. And is there any fights that I kind of missed that you would swap around? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching.